All right, super excited to take you on this journey of optimizing your podcast interviews. If you've already been a guest on a couple of interviews, you know it can go one of like multiple ways that podcast host may or may not have an agenda. They may just want to have a really casual conversation, which I've said this before, being a podcast guest can feel like an absolute waste of time if we don't have a strategy. So here's what I want to do. I've created some three steps, right? Some guidelines for you so that you can optimize every interview, right? Really how you optimize every room, but optimize every interview to generate more leads, to attract your people. Even if you're speaking to everyone, right? You're sharing your story with everyone. In the beginning, I said yes to every podcast opportunity that came to me so I could get practice, right? I wanted to get really comfortable with the camera, with the audio, with the dialogue, being able to be a good active listener and respond to a host question that maybe I wasn't, expecting. And then how do I turn those conversations and turn those answers around so that my agenda is followed without me coming across as snippy, controlling, right? Not wanting to be a team player. Um, as you guys know, my background is in broadcasting, 10 years as a radio talk show host, live daily shows. In fact, I did 4 hours of live daily shows. I was doing 4 hours of talk Monday through Friday when I left broadcasting. So lots of experience in guiding a conversation. And when it comes to podcast interviews, kind of the downside to it is that most hosts are not trained as interviewers, right? They've got this great idea, they've got marketing, they've got a great message, they've got a great platform, but they really haven't been trained up to interview. And so their style is all over the place, right? And we've said this, like, out of 10 interviews, right? Two are going to be really great, three are going to be good, right? But there's always going to be that one that just kind of feels like, all right, they need to be whipped with wet noodles, which is why volume matters. We are not expecting just one podcast interview to be this flash in the pan and give us all this mega success because even one great interview will eventually fizzle out with the momentum, right? So we need to create constant exposure. So write that down, constant exposure by getting booked on two interviews every single week, right? Two interviews every single week keeps your brand elevated, visible, generates leads, creates more excitement and buzz for your business. It like does all the things. So constant exposure is number one, what we are looking for. And number two, we just want to make sure that we are strategic with every single podcast interview that we are a guest on. So there's kind of three phases to optimizing your podcast interview, right? Before the interview, setting yourselves up for success, during the interview, and then after the interview. So there really are three phases to optimizing your interview. So if any one of these kind of falls flat, it's okay, right? That's just 30% of the opportunity. We think oftentimes that the only opportunity is like during the interview itself. That's where I'm going to attract leads. That's where I'm going to really score in the home run. But it's really a lot of this is how we set it up. So before your interview, I want you to think about attracting your audience with intention. So even if we're sharing with everyone, right? Virginia, she was talking about she got on a podcast not too long ago, and it really wasn't her target audience. She's like, I really don't serve this audience at all. But she got on, she delivered value, she realized how she can kind of guide that conversation back to that audience and serve that audience. And at the end of it, not only did she, do a banging job and have an incredible podcast interview, but the host actually decided he wanted to hire her, right? So you want to make sure that you are just a magnetic guest, right? You are attracting your target audience by, even if you're sharing with everyone that you're speaking to your someone. So know who is your target audience and lead with that, right? I help authors, I help parents, I teach entrepreneurs, I teach, I serve, coffee drinkers. Like make sure that you identify and give them some, adjectives that when they hear that adjective, they think that's me or that's somebody I know. If they don't have a name of a human, when they hear your description, we want to, rework that a little bit. So let's give a really clear description of who you serve, right? We help speakers, right? We help speakers get more practice by, more swings, more practice for their presentations by booking them on 100 podcasts over the year, right? So choose speak to your audience, right? But also, I also want you to kind of ditch the niche, right? You don't only have to speak to your audience. You don't only have to get, like, if you serve the dog community, you don't only have to serve dog shows, right? Nurses don't just listen to nursing shows. Teachers don't just like we're humans, right? We have a variety of interests. So you can serve every audience that you're in, right? And speak to every audience about who you serve, but it's in identifying my target audience in my presentation and in my answers that my people will rise up, pay closer attention, and want to follow me. So think about that. Share with everyone, but speak to your someone, but know who your someone is. And that'll help you, right, in identifying and creating and finding the right shows, right, that are going to be a great fit for you. But don't feel like you just have to stay in a niche. The second thing is really having a great hook, right? Even though these are podcast hosts, they come to us, you're responding to a request for being a guest. You still, every fisherman, right? Even if you're fishing in a barrel, you still need a good hook. And so this is that exciting title. Your title, your podcast title becomes the headline for that episode. And people will come for the topic. They'll stay for you. They'll come for the topic. That's the hook. So you want to get 5 times more bookings, 5 times more audiences, audience participation to watch it. And then this also leads to that generating leads on the other side. So your podcast titles matter. This is worthwhile. This is part of why we workshop our podcast titles and we spend so much time thinking about and testing out and tweaking what is it that's going to be a great hook. Not only will this get you booked faster, but it's also going to attract more people to want to listen to the episode. Don't leave this to the podcast host to figure out. You deliver. This is my title, right? And in that, right, I always say it's like a bold promise, a results driven statement, and clarity beats clever, right? So often we want to create these really clever headlines that you understand, but if somebody else is like, I don't really know what that's about. And so here's something to do, right? A little homework. Go to the grocery store and where they have the magazines, right? Look at the magazine headlines and the titles on magazines, and how can you play with those and infuse your brand and your service, right, into some of those headlines and titles. These are some of the best copywriters on the planet, right? And they've created, all you have to do is look at the headlines on these magazines that are meant to grab your attention, to get you pick up that magazine, right, and flip to that article. So that's what we want to do. We want to have a results-driven statement. We want to have a really good headline. And we might even change this headline up multiple times, right? We'll test this one for a few weeks, see what kind of results we get. Marketing is testing, tracking, and tweaking, right? Testing, tracking, and tweaking. So we test it and we track the results, and then we make little shifts and adjustments to make it even better, right? Make it even better. What I don't want you to do is like throw a whole bunch of stuff out there and go, well, nothing worked, because we're business owners, right? We need to start, this is really being a guest on podcasts right now. This is the last marketing platform you ever have to leverage, right? If you get this dialed in for 2 years, I turned off every other marketing opportunity and it was only a guest on podcasts. We grew our Facebook community from 10,000 people to 40,000 people in 2 years. This is an amazing platform, but it's not going to come from your first one or two podcasts. I did 100 podcast interviews. I did hundreds of podcast interviews for 2 years before I even canceled everything else. I was still doing podcast interviews before my 2 year stint of only podcast interviews. And it was an amazing way to grow my audience. So make sure you've got an incredible headline. Take the time to work on that. That'll also guide the conversation, right? It gives you direction in a, 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 a milepost, right? What do you call that? A post, milepost, somewhere you're heading, right? And also in advance, make sure you prepare your talking points. What are the top 3 things you want to share, right? What are the talking points you want to include? What do you want to give away? What incredible value and education? What about your story? Why is your story? Why do you want to share this story? What elements of your story are you going to be sharing in this? And stories are sticky. Stories are what people grab people's attention and bring them in. Right? Stories are what get passed down after generations, right? They're told around the campfire, right? They're told around the water cooler. Stories. So think about the stories, not so much just here's the education point. I want to share this tip, that tip, and this tip. But what are the stories, right? And the metaphors that are going to go along with that? Prepare those in advance so that when people are hearing it, they lean in, right? They're going to want to pick up their pen and take notes, right? They're going to really want to pay attention. So before the show, right? Think about your who, super critical. But ditch the niche that think you only have to talk and get booked on shows that's are targeted to them. Look at the audience, look at the conversation that these hosts are trying to have, and how can you infuse yourself into that conversation. The second thing is that great headline. You've got to have a solid headline that attracts, and we'll tweak that, and we'll just test different messaging throughout this next year, and prepare in advance your stories and your talking points. So that's how you're going to attract your audience with intention. Step one, before you even get booked. Step two, right? During the interview, right? I call this converting with clarity. We're going to make it easy for the listeners to take this next step with you. And you are paving the way. You've got to leave the breadcrumbs, right, for them to follow. Don't just think I'm going to get to the end and I'm going to have my call to action. Because even though 80% of podcast listeners listen all the way to the end of an episode, even if they put it on pause, come back and listen later, you still want to grab their attention from the beginning in your hello, right? In your very welcome. I am so excited to be here to give my three-step framework on how to get booked on podcasts every single week, including my free gift that I'm going to give to everybody just for being here today, right? You in your hello, you want to mention, right, how they can connect with you and that there's good stuff here. Don't just say, "Hey, I'm excited to be here." And right? Like, no, I'm excited to be here to share with your audience, with moms, with entrepreneurs, with parenting, right? On how to, be a better parent with my, three-step framework. And I have a great guide that I'm going to give to everybody just for being here today, right? I have a great gift. So in your hello, right? And make sure, I mean, all you need to start getting booked on podcasts. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have everything all figured out, right? You don't have to have every, your website. You don't have to have all of your products. You don't have to actually have everything all created. All you need is a great opt-in place where people can go and give their email address or, a mobile opt-in that you're using to grab data, right? You need to borrow their audience, get them over into your castle. And so we just need a squeeze page or an opt-in page, a landing page, and any place that collects email addresses counts as an opt-in. We have a really easy way that you can use JotForm. You can use Google Forms. You can use Eventbrite. You can use your merchant services account. Right? There's anything that is collecting an email address where they are signing up, right, and giving you their address. Google Forms, right, work really great for this. JotForms work really great for this. Your website, your landing page. So that's where we want to send them, right, is a place that they're going to give you their email address, not your main website, right? Where they can look at a whole bunch of stuff. We're not sending them to social media to follow you. We are having one clear call to action, one URL we send people to need a guest, right? Book more sales, get more goodies, right? Like something really easy for them to follow so that they can take action. One call to action. I think a lot of times we want to give multiple calls to action, right? Oh, follow me on social, grab my ebook over there, check out my website, call me, book a call. Like we think we're giving a lot of value by giving lots of CTAs, call to actions, right? But really, we're doing nothing. We're getting nothing when we have too many. One. You're going to hear us a lot. We talk about the power of one core topic, one core offer, one marketing platform for 1 year, right? So here's one call to action. It can be a quiz, a checklist, a podcast only offer, a podcast series, a video series, like something, but it has to be something that people would be able to they climb over seats. Like it's got to be really valuable. It's got to be something people want. So test your lead magnets on social, test them out before you go and just, put it out in front. You can test it on a live podcast interview, but it takes too long, right? If you're going to record a podcast and have it released and see what results, you want instant feedback. So use something you can get instant feedback, a social media post to test it, or a live podcast interview to see if people will actually take action and respond. But you just want one clear call to action. And you want to seed it, right? Plant the seed, mention it naturally throughout, right? Throughout your podcast. We run the podcast network, need a guest. And if your audience, if they're looking for a network, a free place that they can connect and start getting booked on podcasts, I have a dozen podcast hosts this week who are looking for guests, and you can follow them, right? Find and connect to them directly, right? Today in our Facebook group, and you can get there naturally or quickly by going to needaguest.com. Just mention it. Mention it in your story, right? This is why we created this incredible platform. This is why we created this incredible quiz, right? This recipe, this cookbook, right? This list, right? This is why we created it. I love that phrase. This is why, right? This is why. So make sure that when you answer a question, right, you seed back to your call to action, right? And that you don't just wait till the very end. It's your job. Don't wait for the podcast host to bring it up. You might run out of time. You might run short on time. But if you have seeded it and mentioned it naturally and casually throughout, then you don't feel like you missed out on an opportunity, right? Make sure that it's results driven and that don't just say, go get my ebook, right? Go and learn the 5 top things that you need to do right now to get booked on podcasts, right? Like make it a sense of urgency, create it, it's a bold promise, a bold answer to the answer. Your person, right? Share with everyone, but speak to your someone. Make sure that that person knows that they want it. And you're going to provide tons of value throughout the interview to make sure the audience continues to pay attention throughout the thing. Now, what happens, right? How do you answer a question? What happens if there's a question that goes off track and how do you get it back on track? How do you answer the questions? I love the formula of LLL, location, 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 which means where you were, where I'm at, and where I'm going. So, Angel, how is that podcasting? Or, maybe they'll ask me a question about, you live in Orlando. Do you go to Disney all the time? I'm like, that is a great question. Thanks. Yeah, when I was a broadcaster in Denver, I lived in Denver and I was a broadcaster. And that's when we created our whole media mastery program. And now I live in Orlando where I can continue to work from home. Yes, I get to go to the park all the time. I'm a digital marketer. So I create my own hours, create my own lifestyle. And that's what I teach my clients to do. Being a podcast guest, they can work from anywhere. So you can even move, right? Do your interviews in your pajamas. And my goal is really to create the most profitable podcast guests on the planet. And I love that I can do it right here from my home in Orlando, right? So, you know, it's okay if it's messy. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, there's no such thing as a perfect interview. Everyone, we just get better, right? Which is, again, why volume matters. Go and book 2 interviews this week and just get more practice. Your first 100 stages are practice. It's why we created this for you. Um, Okay. So during the interview, right, we want to make sure that in our welcome, in our hello, we're talking to our person, we're seeding our call to action, what the freebie is, how people can work with us. If you are the author of the book, mention it, right? In the very beginning, lead with that. People follow authors, right? So make sure you have right from your hello, the only thing you're selling, quote unquote selling, right, is your freebie, right, in order to generate leads. That's the strategy. That's why you're here. Don't forget that. This isn't just to have a random conversation with no direction. Your job is to attract your audience, to pull that audience out, those listeners out, and get them to take action and want to follow with you. So provide tons of value, have your talking points prepared, make sure you've got good stories, and just stay really hyped up and engaged throughout the entire interview. If you find your energy is kind of waning, right, make sure that you've got a story in a way that you can pick that up, right? Get something in there that's going to juice you up. Your bold promise, right? That'll do it. Tell people, I am committed to your success. And this is what we're doing. And this is how we deliver that. Okay, beyond the interview, right? We want to create constant exposure. That's the whole goal, constant exposure. And so the interview is gonna drop, and we are expecting, right, for that first day for there to be an influx of listeners who are listening the day it drops, but it's going to continue to grow, right, throughout that, throughout the next day, the next week, the next month, right? It's going to continue to snowball, have that snowball effect. But so watch it. So make sure that you're tracking. When is that interview going to drop? Make sure you're promoting it, that you're sharing it, that you're grabbing that link immediately, sharing it on your social, watch it yourself. You can share it in your emails. We like to share our podcast interviews on our weekend emails, right? Here's where we were this week. Here's a recap of all the places, right, that I was, right? Um, Podcast interviews, they're the new modern tour, right? They're the modern stage, the modern book tour. You don't ever have to leave home, right? But make sure that you're grabbing that link and you're resharing it, right? You can grab quotes, you can grab clips out of it, you can turn it into a blog article, right? You can repurpose that content. It is social media content, it's repurposable content, it is shareable content, but make sure that you're grabbing that link and you're participating in the exposure of it and tag the host. If you post about them and share that you are a guest on this show, tag the host. Like they appreciate that. And when you think about exposure and visibility, you have a reach and they have a reach, but combined, your combined reach, you'll both reach people you've never had a chance to connect with before. They are your marketing partner. You are their marketing partner, right? And so it's both of us coming together to create exposure for this episode. So make sure that you're sharing the link, you're repurposing the link, and that you're tracking. You should start to see, I can always tell when a new episode has been released because I'm getting new leads coming in, right? I'm getting new people opting in, right? So keep track of that. And if for some reason, then go back and listen to the podcast, make sure that the lead magnet that you sent them to, double check that it's working, right? Test it to make sure that all the steps are in place and that everything's working. Don't just assume that it is because it was the day of. Make sure that you're testing it that day and make sure all the technology is working. Because again, don't just leave it up to them. Like this is part of our job as well. And then deliver, right? Make sure that whatever you promise those leads as they opt in, that you're fulfilling on that promise and delivering them. Make sure they're in your funnel. Make sure that they're in your email list. Now send them a welcome sequence, deliver the goods, right, that you promised them, and then continue to build and add value by sending those or stay in front of them by emailing your list consistently and regularly. We teach a daily process of sending emails every day, but 2 or 3 times a week, just up your game. The secret is volume. We're all doing enough, like we're all doing the right things, but what we are just finding is we're just not doing enough, right? If you're booking sales calls and those calls are converting to clients, what should we do more of? Book more sales calls, right? If every time we get on a podcast, we attract more leads into our email list, what should we do more of? Get on more podcasts, right? Attract more leads. So make sure that you're just doing the volume, the activities, the daily activities that are going to create constant exposure, get your message out there and attract more leads into your email list and into your funnel, right? So that's how we want to optimize your interview, right? Be a good storyteller, you know, give good value to that audience. Make sure that you are engaging. You've got one single call to action, and that call to action is working. And then practice. Go and get booked every week. Get your story in front of a brand new audience every week, and then make sure you're announcing to the world, I just got booked on another show. I just booked another show. I just booked another show. This one I just recorded a show. I just released a show. Right? Talk about starting a fire, a media fire starter and a media fire storm, right? Here we go. Boom, right? You everywhere. Optimizing your interviews. Our goal to create the most profitable podcast on the planet. And this is the system. Cheers.